The road to Amuahia village had not changed much, but everything felt different to Adora. Her heels clicked on the dusty earth as the wind swept dry leaves across the narrow path, like forgotten memories chasing her footsteps. It had been 10 years since she left, 10 years of silence, distance, and things unsaid. Now, she was back, not out of choice, but because her father was dead. His funeral had summoned her, and though the village sang mourning songs, the air held more than grief. It was thick with tension, old wounds, and unspoken history. Adora's suitcase felt heavier than it should. It wasn't the clothes or the books she carried, but the guilt she'd buried deep inside. The family compound hadn't changed much either. Her mother barely met her eyes. Her brothers greeted her stiffly, as if unsure whether to hug her or scold her for staying away so long. She noticed how they avoided the topic of her absence, but behind their smiles were stories she had missed, pains she had ignored, and scars that hadn't healed. But there was one presence that still lingered, one name that still echoed like a whisper on every tongue. Mama Nika. Her grandmother had died 5 years ago, but the village had not forgotten. People still lowered their voices when they spoke of her. Some said Mama Nika had powers that stretched beyond the grave. Others claimed she had warned the family before her death, but no one listened. She had once been the village's greatest herbalist and storyteller. Children used to sit under the Iroko tree to hear her tales. Women sought her wisdom, even chiefs respected her. But in her final years, something changed. She grew quiet, withdrawn, and when she died, strange things began to happen. They buried her in the ancestral grove, as tradition required, but not everyone believed she stayed buried. There were stories, strange ones. A child once said he saw her sitting on her grave. A hunter heard laughter in the trees. Her grave, marked by 3 dark stones and a carved wooden staff, stood deeper in the forest than any had dared to go. Since her burial, they said, the earth around it never stayed settled, as if something inside still moved. Adora tried to shake the feeling off, but it clung to her like smoke. As night fell and drums echoed through the hills for her father's wake, her thoughts drifted not to him, but to Mama Nika. She remembered the last time they spoke, how harsh she'd been, how she'd rejected her grandmother's ways, calling them backward and foolish. Mama Nika had simply looked at her, eyes full of something Adora didn't understand back then, sorrow, or maybe warning. Now with her return, stirring whispers in the past rising like dust in the wind, Adora could feel that something was not at rest, and she feared, deep down, that her return had awakened more than just memories. The grave in the grove was waiting, and so was the truth. The next morning, Adora sat alone in the small courtyard behind the house, her father's mourning cloth still wrapped tightly around her waist. The village was quiet now. The drums had stopped. The visitors were gone. The only sound was the soft rustle of the mango tree above her, where birds chirped like whispers from the past. She stared at the clay stove her grandmother once used, where smoke no longer rose. A lump sat in her throat, heavy and sharp. Her eyes drifted to the corner where Mama Nika's stool used to sit. And in that moment, the memory came back like a wave, clear, strong, and painful. She was 10 years old again, barefoot, laughing as she ran into the grove behind the house. Mama Nika was waiting, her wrapper tied high, her hands holding a basket of herbs. "Come, Nwam," she had said, smiling. "Let me show you how to speak to the leaves." Adora used to follow her everywhere, asking questions, learning the names of trees, roots, and the meaning behind every folktale. Her grandmother's stories were like magic, full of lessons, warnings, and wisdom. Those were happy days. But they didn't last. The memory shifted. She was older, now 15. Her school uniform was crisp, her English sharper. She had just passed her exams and been accepted to a school in the city. That day, Mama Nika called her aside. "Before you go," she said gently, "kneel. Let me pray for you with the ancestors. They will guide your steps." But Adora didn't. "Kneel. I don't need any spirits, Mama," she had snapped. "This is not the olden days. I believe in science, not herbs and ghosts." Mama Nika looked hurt but calm. "You may not understand now, but you will one day," she said quietly. Adora had walked away without looking back. That was the beginning of the silence between them. She wiped her eyes now, sitting in the present, her heart aching. She remembered the last time they spoke 2 years later. Mama Nika had come to the city uninvited, bringing herbs for Adora's illness. But instead of gratitude, Adora had shouted at her, "You think you're helping, but you're only making things worse. People say you're a witch. Maybe they're right." Mama Nika had stood there, silent, eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. She turned away slowly and left without a word. And then she died. No one expected it. A fever, they said. But some believed she knew her time was near. She had called the family together before the sickness took her, asking one thing, that they bury her with the rites of her ancestors, the way her mother and grandmother had been laid to rest. She had even prepared the sacred cloth and beads. But the family was divided. Adora's uncle, now a deacon, refused. He said the rites were pagan. Her mother said the cost was too high. Adora didn't speak. She didn't even attend the burial. They buried Mama Nika in silence. No chants, no offerings, no stories. Just soil over wood and a hurried prayer. Now, 5 years later, Adora was back, and the grief she thought she had buried came crawling out like roots under the earth. She rose from the stool, slowly, staring out at the path that led to the ancestral grove, the place no one talked about but everyone feared. She could almost hear Mama Nika's voice come soft, filled with both love and warning, and in her chest Adora felt it something pulling her, not just guilt but a call, a need to face the truth, a need to make things right. She wasn't sure what she would find in that grove, but she knew one thing now. Mama Nika had never truly left. Adora stood near the doorway of her family compound, her arms folded across her chest. She should have been focused on her father's final rites, but something felt off. The sky was darker than it should have been. The wind kept shifting, as if unsure where to blow. And above the tall Iroko tree in the distance, a circle of black crows spun quietly, their wings slicing the air in eerie silence. She shivered. Suddenly, the fire in the main courtyard used for cooking the funeral meal then went out, leaving only smoke behind. A loud gasp followed, and a small boy screamed, pointing toward the grove. I saw her. I saw Mama Nika watching us. The crowd froze. Women clutched their wrappers tighter. An old man dropped his walking stick. The boy's mother grabbed him, quickly, whispering prayers and pulling him away. But the damage was done. People began to whisper, not about the man they had come to bury but about the one who had already been buried, and maybe hadn't stayed that way. That night, as most guests began to leave, the family gathered in the sitting room. Adora, her mother, her uncles, and her younger siblings sat in silence, the only light coming from an oil lamp on the floor. Then Chinedu, the youngest, barely 13, spoke. I've been having dreams, he said, his voice small. Every night. This week, I see Mama Nika. She's calling me. From under the ground, Adora's heart skipped. Chinedu's eyes were wide, his hands trembling. She says she's not sleeping, that we forgot something, that she's cold. Their mother gasped, crossing herself. One uncle stood up and said it was nonsense, but everyone could feel it that their air had changed. That same night, Adora slipped outside into the cold air, searching for answers. That's when she saw her cousin speaking to an old woman wrapped in red and brown cloth. Her eyes were painted with white chalk and her voice was low and sharp. A seer, someone who could speak to spirits. Adora stood back, listening. That's a seer. Looked toward the sky, then pointed to the earth. The woman buried in the grove, she said, has not slept. She was sent off without her voice, buried without her story. She waits now not for revenge, but for release. Adora stepped forward, her voice shaking. What do we do? The seer turned slowly, her eyes locking onto hers. You must listen. The earth remembers, and so does she. In that moment, thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was clear. And Adora knew deep in her chest something was waking. And this time, no one could pretend it wasn't real. She's waiting, she said quietly. I don't know how I know, but I feel it. We have to do what she asked before she died. She deserves peace. The room fell silent. One by one, the others lowered their heads. Finally, the decision was made. They would go to the grove. They would dig. By noon, preparations began. 2 grave diggers were called from the next village. Shovels were sharpened, mats were laid out. Offerings of palm oil and kola nuts were packed. But as they moved closer to the grove, the sky turned dark. Raindrops began to fall slow at first, then faster, then harder. Still, they walked. Adora led the way, her heart pounding with every step. Her feet sank into the wet ground, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the family followed. Some held umbrellas. Others wore old wrappers to shield themselves. When they reached the grove, the trees stood tall and silent like watchers. The grave was marked by 3 stones and the carved staff Mama Nika once carried. The soil looked untouched, but the air was thick and tense. The grave diggers paused. I don't like this place. One of them whispered she was no ordinary woman. The other added, we should have been told. An elder stepped forward, holding a small clay pot of herbs. He began to chant, low and slow. His voice trembled. O ancestors, forgive us. We come not to disturb, but to restore. The wind picked up. The trees groaned as if answering. The rain poured harder. The diggers hesitated. Adora stepped beside the grave, her wrapper soaked and clinging to her skin. She placed her hand on one of the stones. If anyone should face her, she said, it should be me. Her voice cracked, her eyes burned with tears, but she didn't back away. One of the diggers sighed, lifted his shovel and struck the earth. The sound echoed like thunder. Mud splashed. Steam rose from the ground, though the rain was cold, and still the trees stood watching as the digging continued. Adora looked into the forest, her chest heavy. Something told her that what they were about to uncover was bigger than they imagined. And deep beneath the soil, something waited not with anger but with purpose. The digging had gone on for nearly an hour. Rain soaked the ground, turning the soil into thick black mud. The air felt heavier now, each breath harder to take. Adora stood near the grave, silent, arms wrapped around herself, her clothes clinging to her like a second skin. With every shovel of dirt, the wind grew stronger. The trees around them creaked. A strange humming sound rose from deep below the earth, like something long buried was finally stirring. Then a loud clang. One of the diggers stepped back. "We've hit something," he said, breathless. Adora stepped forward, her heart pounding. The second digger scraped away more soil, revealing the edges of the coffin. It was old, dark, but unbroken. Not a single crack. They wiped off the last of the mud and looked at each other. One of them nodded. The other placed his hands on the lid. As they pushed it open, a sharp wind burst from the grave, foul and cold like rotting flowers. The villagers watching nearby gasped. Someone dropped a lantern. The flame hissed out in the mud, and there she was, Mama Nika, sitting upright inside the coffin. Not lying, sitting. Her body was fully preserved. Her brown skin was smooth. Her eyes, wide open, seemed to look straight at them. Her hands rested gently on her lap, just as they used to when she told stories under the Iroko tree. Adora froze. Her legs felt weak. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed and ran. An old woman fainted, falling into the mud. Even the gravediggers stumbled back, dropping their tools. One began to whisper prayers under his breath. "She's not dead," someone cried. "This is witchcraft." "No," another voice said, shaky and scared. "This is something else." Chinadu stepped forward slowly, past the others. His small feet splashed in the muddy water, but he didn't flinch. He stared into the coffin, eyes wide but calm. He leaned in, whispering so softly it almost got lost in the wind. "She's not angry. She's waiting." Everyone turned to look at him. Adaora couldn't move. She couldn't even blink. Something inside her cracked open. Guilt, grief, fear, and something else. A strange sense of knowing. Mama Nika's face didn't show rage. It didn't even look like death. It looked like patience, like she had been waiting for something, for someone. For this moment, the wind eased, the rain slowed, the forest stood still. Adora's eyes filled with tears. She took a step forward, kneeling at the edge of the grave. She looked into her grandmother's face and finally understood. This wasn't a curse. This was a calling. The grave had been left open, but covered with white cloth and palm fronds. By nightfall, a fire burned at the edge of the grove, and the villagers gathered with lanterns in their hands and worry in their eyes. A midnight vigil had been called. No one argued with the elders this time. Fear had spread faster than rumor. The forest was too quiet, the wind too strange. The sitting corpse of Mama Nika had broken every law of nature they knew. Something had to be done. A village priest arrived, holding a wooden cross and a bottle of holy water. He stood before the family and said, with firm voice, "This is not natural. This is not of God. We must burn the body before it brings more darkness." Murmurs ran through the crowd. But before anyone could move, the seer stepped out from the shadows, dressed in her red and brown cloth, her eyes lined in white chalk. "If you burn what you do not understand," she said slowly, "you will set fire to yourselves." Her voice was calm, but powerful. "She does not want revenge," the seer continued. "She wants the truth. Only that will let her sleep." The priest turned away, but no one followed him. All eyes turned to Adaora. She stood at the edge of the circle, her face pale, her lips trembling. The firelight danced on her wet skin. She knew what had to happen. Her grandmother wasn't just waiting, she was calling her. "I was the one," Adora whispered, her voice breaking. "I rejected her. I rejected all of it." The crowd grew silent. "I turned my back on her. I said terrible things. I laughed at her beliefs. When she asked for the old burial rites, I said nothing. I let them bury her like a stranger, and then I left." Her knees gave way, and she dropped to the ground. "I thought I was moving forward, but I was running away. I thought her ways were foolish, but now I see she only wanted to pass her truth to me, and I threw it away." The seer stepped forward and placed her hand on Adora's head. "Then speak her truth," she said, "and let the spirits bear witness." The drums began slow, deep, and steady. A circle of chalk was drawn around Adora, and a pot of burning herbs was placed beside her. The smoke rose quickly, thick and white, carrying the scent of bitter leaves and forgotten time. Adaora closed her eyes, and the world around her faded. The vision: she stood in a small hut. The air was warm. Mama Nika sat on a mat, her body weak, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. She was alone, her voice barely a whisper. "I called for them," she said, but no one came. Adora saw herself standing at the door but turning away. "I saved them," Mama Nika said, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I healed their wounds. I told them the stories that kept them alive. But now, even my own blood is ashamed of me." She coughed and pressed a piece of white cloth to her chest. "I don't want power. I want peace. I want to be feared." She lay down, alone, her last breath soft like a sigh. The vision shifted. Now Adora stood in the grove, watching her uncles bury Mama Nika without the chants, without the rites. The cloth she had prepared was tossed aside, her staff broken and left behind. Adora screamed in the vision, trying to stop them, but no one could hear her. Back in the present, Adora gasped, falling out of the trance. Her face was wet with tears. The villagers watched her, silent and still. "She forgives us," Adora said. "She forgives me, but she cannot rest until her story is told, until the truth is spoken." The seer nodded. "Then tell it," she said, "and let her name rise again, this time in honor." Adora stood, shoulders heavy but heart clear. She knew what needed to come next. Mama Nika would not be forgotten, and her truth would finally be heard. The sky was still dark, but the rain had stopped. The earth was quiet now like it, too, was waiting. A fire burned low beside the grave. The villagers stood in a wide circle holding calabashes of water, palm leaves, and white cloth. The seer moved slowly between them, chanting words that felt old and deep, like the kind only ancestors understood. Adora stood at the center, her eyes red from tears, but her voice steady. She wore a white wrapper across her shoulders, tied like a sash of humility. In her hands, she held Mama Nika's old staff freshly cleaned, the carvings shining in the firelight. The air was filled with smoke from burning herbs, the scent bitter and sharp sin to chase away fear and invite memory. The cleansing ritual began. Each family member stepped forward to wash their hands in sacred water mixed with leaves. The seer said it would remove shame and guilt. Adora, we poured water over her own hands, slowly, feeling her fingers tremble. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a letting go. The village women sang softly, their voices like the wind through the trees. The elders clapped in rhythm, slow and strong. When the chanting stopped, Adora stepped toward the grave. The coffin was still open. Mama Nika's body no longer sat upright. Now, as if by unseen hands, she lay gently on her back, eyes closed, arms folded over her chest. A peaceful stillness surrounded her. Adora knelt beside her and began to speak. She didn't read from any book. She told Mama Nika's story from the beginning, how she had healed the sick with herbs, how she had taught the children stories, how she protected the village from spirits no one dared name. She told the truth not just about her powers, but her kindness, her strength, her loneliness. I'm sorry I didn't listen, Adora whispered, but I'm listening now, and so are they. The seer stepped forward, handing Adora a small bowl filled with ground chalk and crushed leaves. Adora dipped her fingers into it and marked Mama Nika's forehead. The symbol was a spiral, the sign of journey, return, and peace. One by one, the family placed offerings in the coffin. Kola nuts, a beaded necklace, her old comb, a small gourd of palm wine. Then came the final rite. The men lifted the coffin and gently lowered it back into the earth, this time lined with sacred leaves. No one rushed. Every movement was slow, respectful, full of meaning. As the last handful of soil was poured, a faint golden light rose from the grave, soft like morning mist. And then they heard it. Birdsong. Clear, sweet, and strong. The first light of dawn broke through the trees, washing the grove in soft gold. A breeze passed through the circle, gentle and warm, not cold, not bitter. Adora felt her chest lift. She looked around and saw the faces of the villagers, no longer afraid, but calm. Even the children stood still, watching the earth as if they too knew something sacred had happened. The seer turned to Adora and smiled. She is home now. Adora nodded. She wasn't just burying a grandmother, she was restoring a legacy, and for the first time in years, the forest felt quiet in a good way, like peace. Days passed. The forest stayed quiet, peaceful, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. The tension that once gripped the village had softened. Life slowly returned to normal, but something had changed. Not just in the trees or the sky, but in Adora. She didn't leave. The bags she had packed for her return to the city remained untouched in her room. Instead of boarding a bus back to her life in the city, she walked the narrow paths of the village barefoot, retracing the same steps she once ran through as a child beside Mama Nika. Every morning, she rose early to fetch water and sit with the old women who had known her grandmother best. She listened to their songs, their remedies, and their stories. She asked questions not to challenge but to understand. They welcomed her not as a stranger, but as one of their own. She spent her afternoons with the seer, learning the roots, leaves, and whispers of the land. The herbs Mama Nika once held in her fingers now passed through Adora's hands. For the first time in her life, she didn't run from her bloodline, she honored it. In the center of the village, where the earth was rich and undisturbed, the villagers came together to build something new. A shrine, simple but beautiful, made of clay and palm wood. It stood tall, surrounded by flowers, and inside it rested a single item, Mama Nika's staff, now wrapped in white cloth and tied with red string. Children brought fresh leaves to the shrine each morning, women lit candles, and the men who once feared the forest now came to offer kola nuts and prayers. The line is restored, the elders whispered. The spirit speaks again. One afternoon, beneath the tall Iroko tree, Adora sat on a woven mat. Children gathered at her feet. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting soft gold across their eager faces. She smiled, her voice clear and warm. Once in this very village, she began, there lived a woman named Mama Nika. She was wise, she was strong, but when she died, she didn't lie down. She sat upright because her story had not yet been heard. The children leaned closer, wide-eyed. She waited not for revenge, but for someone to carry her truth. And now, we tell it so her spirit can sleep, and her name can live forever. The wind passed gently through the tree branches, as if nodding in agreement. And in that moment, Adora didn't feel lost anymore. She felt home.